police officer's hand was resting on the butt of his sidearm. It's hot, in a threatening way, but in a way that telegraphs readiness. His eyes, shaded by dark sunglasses, were fixed on me. I stood on my own porch, a half-empty coffee mug in my hand, my heart hammering a frantic, unsteady rhythm against my ribs. Between us, on the manicured lawn that I was apparently a blight upon, stood Beverly. She was in her element, the star of a drama she had summoned into existence. "He's a squatter officer," she proclaimed, her voice a shrill instrument of righteous indignation. Her finger, tipped with a perfect French manicure, was pointed directly at my chest. "The real owner is almost never here. This man just showed up. He's a vagrant, eh? Transient. Look at him. He's probably casing all of our homes right now. You have to remove him." I tried to speak, to inject some sanity into the surreal scene, but my voice was lost in the storm of her accusations. The young officer took a deliberate step forward, off the grass and onto the stone path leading to my porch. He was listening. To her, her confidence, her sheer, unadulterated certainty was painting a picture, and I was being cast as the villain. A cold, heavy dread began to settle in my stomach. She was actually going to win this. This was her neighborhood, her world. And I was just an intruder. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment of sheer unadulterated madness, you have to understand the 30 years that came before it. My name is John Evans. For most of my adult life, I was known as Colonel Evans. I spent 3 decades in the United States Army, the last 10 of them in Special Operations Command. My life was a meticulously structured existence of high-stakes, impossible logistics, and life-or-death decisions made in the blink of an eye. I've commanded men in places most people only see in grainy news reports. My world was one of discipline, honor, and a profound, unshakable sense of duty. When I retired, the silence was the hardest part. The absence of routine, of purpose, of a clear chain of command, it was disorienting. I didn't want a condo in Florida or a house in a bustling suburb. I wanted solitude. I wanted a place where the only orders I had to follow were the whims of the weather. I found it in a small log cabin I'd bought years earlier as a getaway, tucked away on the edge of the Eagle Mountain Lake Estates. The cabin was my sanctuary. Built in the 1960s, long before the surrounding area was developed, it was a simple, honest structure of hand-hewn logs and river stone. It smelled of cedar and wood smoke. It was grandfathered into the development, a rustic little island in a sea of sprawling beige McMansions with 3-car garages and perfectly identical landscaping. That sea of beige was governed by the Eagle Mountain Lake Homeowners Association, and its admiral was Beverly. Beverly was a woman who had mistaken her HOA presidency for a military commission. She saw the world in infractions. Her power, though confined to the covenants of our little community, was absolute in her own mind. She patrolled the neighborhood in a golf cart she called the Compliance Cruiser, clipboard her constant companion, her eyes scanning for any blade of grass that dared to grow a millimeter too tall. There was an immediate and palpable tension between the handful of older, rustic cabins like mine and the new, wealthy residents who made up Beverly's power base. To them, we were an eyesore, a blemish on their perfect, homogeneous world. My first interaction with Beverly should have been a warning. She came by a week after I moved in, not to welcome me, but to assess me. She walked the perimeter of my property, her lips pursed in a permanent state of disapproval. "Well," she'd said, her eyes lingering on the stack of firewood by my back door, "this is certainly rustic. We're all very excited to see what you'll do with the place. The board has a list of pre-approved architects and landscape designers, you know? We're trying to encourage a more cohesive, modern aesthetic in the community." "I like it just the way it is, Beverly," I'd said politely. "That's why I bought it." The look she gave me was one of utter incomprehension, as if I'd just told her I enjoyed eating dirt. I wasn't playing the game, I wasn't conforming. In her eyes, I had just failed my first inspection. The battle lines I would soon learn had been drawn. A week later, the first official salvo was fired. A crisp, white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside, on thick, embossed letterhead, was a formal notice of violation. I read it, my brow furrowing in disbelief. I was being cited for 2 violations. First, non-uniform exterior siding material, with a note that unpainted logs were not on the list of approved finishes. Second, unapproved native landscaping, with a note that the wild black-eyed Susans and mountain laurels growing on my property were not compliant with the community's manicured floral guidelines. It was so absurd I almost laughed. She was fining me for my cabin being a log cabin. She was fining me for the natural landscape of the mountain we lived on. This wasn't about rules. This was a direct assault on the very existence of my home. I decided to attend the next monthly HOA meeting to contest it. I was still operating under the naive assumption that logic and reason would prevail. The meeting was held in the community's sterile clubhouse. I stood before Beverly and her board of disciples and calmly stated my case, explaining that the cabin's construction and landscaping predated the HOA by several decades and were grandfathered in. Beverly listened with a condescending patience, a little smirk playing on her lips. When I was finished, she addressed the room. "While we appreciate Mr. Evans's passion for history," she began, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "we have a duty to all residents to protect our property values. A cohesive aesthetic is crucial for maintaining the prestige of our community. We cannot have exceptions." The board, her loyal echo chamber, voted unanimously to uphold the violations. The message was unmistakable: conform or be punished. I walked out of that clubhouse with a cold, familiar feeling hardening in my gut. I was being targeted by a hostile force. The harassment escalated, becoming a strange, low-intensity warfare. Beverly's compliance cruiser began making multiple daily passes by my cabin. I'd be reading on my porch and would see her, slowed to a crawl on the road, taking pictures with her phone. I received a fine for an improperly stored firewood pile. Another for a visible satellite dish, which was tucked away behind. The chimney had been there for 10 years. My quiet sanctuary was starting to feel like a fishbowl. My privacy was being systematically stripped away. I installed a security camera system, a measure I'd only ever considered for my operational bases in war zones, not my retirement home. The irony was bitter. My anger, which had been a slow simmer, was beginning to boil. I was a man who had commanded thousands. I had advised generals and negotiated with tribal warlords. The idea that this petty tyrant, this commander of lawn ornaments and mailbox regulations, was succeeding in getting under my skin was infuriating. My entire career had been about confronting threats head-on, but my retirement was supposed to be about peace. Now, the internal conflict was tearing me up. Do I engage and fight this ridiculous war, or do I try to find a way to ignore it and preserve my tranquility? Beverly made the decision for me. A thick envelope arrived via certified mail. It was a formal demand letter from the HOA's lawyer. It stated that if I did not submit formal architectural plans to renovate the cabin's exterior to meet modern community standards, a thinly veiled demand that I cover my beautiful log home with soulless vinyl siding within 90 days. The HOA would begin fining me $200 per day indefinitely. This was it, a declaration of total war. She was giving me an ultimatum: destroy the very thing I loved about my home, or be financially bled dry. She was trying to force me out. I contacted a lawyer. He was sympathetic but pragmatic. "It's targeted harassment, plain and simple," he'd said. "But they'll drag this out in court, claim they're just enforcing the rules. It could take years and cost you a fortune to win." I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. Had just come home from a 30-year war, only to find myself in a new one. A battle of attrition against an enemy armed with bylaws and endless petty grievances. I needed a break. I decided to take a week to visit my daughter and my new grandson a few states away. I needed to clear my head, to be reminded of what was actually important in life. I packed a bag, locked up the cabin, and left under the cover of darkness, just to avoid another drive-by from the compliance cruiser. The week with my family was a balm for my soul. I held my grandson, I talked with my daughter, and for a little while, I forgot about Beverly and her ridiculous war. I drove back through the night, arriving home just before dawn. I was tired but refreshed. My resolve hardened. I was not going to let her win. The next morning I woke early. Air was crisp and cool. Made a pot of strong coffee, grabbed my favorite mug, and went to sit on my front porch just to watch the sun rise over the lake. Unshaven, wearing a faded flannel shirt and worn jeans. I probably looked like I'd been living in the woods for a month. I felt a sense of peace settle over me for the first time in weeks. This was my home. This was worth fighting for. And that's when I saw it. The white golf cart gliding silently down the road. It stopped abruptly. Beverly was at the wheel. She stared at me, her eyes going wide with a kind of shocked horror. In her small, paranoid mind, the cabin was supposed to be empty. She'd probably been enjoying the peace and quiet of my absence. Seeing me on the porch was like finding a rat in her pristine kitchen. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I didn't need to. Her face was a mask of furious purpose. 10 minutes. Later, a county sheriff's car came rolling down the street, its lights off, but its presence unmistakable. It pulled up in front of my cabin. Beverly was already out of her cart, marching to meet the officer, her voice a torrent of frantic accusations before he was even fully out of his vehicle. And that's how I found myself on my own porch. Being sized up by a young police officer? While the HOA president accused me of invading my own home, the young officer advanced up my stone walkway. Beverly followed at his heels, a relentless narrator of my supposed crimes. He's not the owner, she insisted, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. The owner is a retired gentleman, very distinguished, hardly ever here. This man is a squatter, a drifter. He's probably been breaking into all the empty vacation homes. He's a danger to us all. She pointed at my unshaven face and my old flannel shirt, as if they were Exhibit A in the case against me. The officer stopped at the bottom of my porch steps. He was young, looked to be in his late 20s, with a professional, serious demeanor. "Sir," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Officer Riley. We've received a report of a possible trespass, a potential home invasion in progress. Could I see some identification, please?" I had come out with nothing but my coffee mug. My wallet was inside, on the kitchen counter. "My ID is inside, officer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is John Evans. I own this home. This woman is mistaken." "He's lying," Beverly crowed. "Trick you. Don't let him go inside. He's probably got weapons in there." The officer held up a hand to silence her, but his eyes were still on me, weighing the situation. He saw a frantic but well-dressed community leader versus a scruffy-looking guy in an old cabin with no ID. The scales were not tipping in my favor. The situation was slipping away, spiraling into a vortex of her madness. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The old, familiar feeling of a situation going south fast. I sighed. "Officer, I'm going to go inside now and get my wallet so we can clear this up." I turned to go. As I did, Officer Riley took a half step forward, his posture tensing. But he wasn't looking at my back. He was looking at my face, really. Looking at it, his head tilted slightly. The bright morning sun was hitting me directly. A flicker of something crossed his face. Confusion, disbelief, and then dawning, earth-shattering recognition. His entire body changed. The professional but cautious police stance dissolved. His back went ramrod straight, his shoulders squared. The casual cop was gone, replaced in an instant by a soldier. "Sir," said, his voice barely a whisper, hesitant and full of awe. Colonel Evans? Is that you, sir?" I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back to face him. I looked at his face, really looked at him past the uniform and the badge. The strong jaw, the clear eyes. And then I knew. Riley. Specialist Riley. A good kid. A damn good soldier. Part of my forward reconnaissance team in the Quaranjil Valley. A lifetime ago, I gave him a small, tired smile. "It's just John now, Riley. But yes, it's me." A effect was instantaneous and absolute. Officer Riley snapped to attention. His heels clicked together on the stone path. His right hand came up in a perfect, sharp parade ground salute. It was a gesture of such ingrained, profound respect that it seemed to suck all the air out of the morning. Beverly's jaw dropped. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish. She stared at the scene, her brain utterly failing to compute what she was seeing. "Colonel, I am so sorry, sir," Riley said, his voice now crisp and formal, his hand still at his brow. "I didn't recognize you out of uniform, sir. My apologies." He dropped the salute and turned to face a completely stunned Beverly. His entire demeanor toward her had shifted. The polite officer was gone. In his place was a subordinate officer, who had just found his commanding officer being harassed by a hostile civilian. "Ma'am," said his voice now cold as ice. "This man is Colonel John Evans. I served under his command in the 75th Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan. He is the most decorated officer I have ever had the honor of serving with. And he is the legal owner of this property," Beverly stammered, her face a blotchy mess of confusion and dawning horror. But he looked. He looked like a man enjoying his retirement," Riley cut in, his voice sharp. "A retirement he earned defending this country, so people like you could have the luxury of worrying about the color of your neighbor's siding." He took a step toward her. "You called 911. You reported a home invasion in progress. Is a Class A misdemeanor in this state if filed with malicious intent or without evidence. Did you have any actual evidence that a crime was being committed, or did you just not like the look of him?" She was speechless, completely and utterly broken. Riley took out his official notepad. "You know what? Let's talk about this. The colonel here seems to be the victim of a targeted harassment campaign. Let's start with those illegal fines you've been sending him." The investigation had turned 180 degrees. He was no longer investigating me. He was investigating her. He took her statement. He took my statement. He took copies of all the violation notices and the threatening letter from the HOA's lawyer. His professionalism was absolute. But there was an undercurrent of protective fury in every question he asked her. As he was finishing up, he looked back at me. He was a cop again, but the ingrained respect was still there, a foundation beneath the uniform. "He stood a little straighter, sir," he said, his voice quiet and completely serious. "What are your orders?" I looked at this good young man, a man I hadn't seen in a decade, a man who had grown from a scared specialist into a confident peace officer. I felt a surge of pride that was so overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. "Just do your job, Officer Riley," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Just do your job." He nodded. "Yes, sir." Beverly was officially cited for filing a false police report. The report Officer Riley wrote was a masterpiece of detailed, factual condemnation of her and the HOA's actions. The news of what happened, of the HOA president calling the cops on a decorated war hero only to have that same cop salute him and take her to task, spread through Eagle Mountain Lake like a wildfire. She was publicly, profoundly humiliated. The board, facing a potential lawsuit and a full-blown community rebellion, forced her to resign in disgrace. The endless violations and threats against me stopped instantly. This whole insane episode taught me something. In my old life, respect was earned through rank and action. I thought that in retirement, I was just another anonymous old man. But respect, true respect, isn't about the uniform you wear. It's about the person you are and the impact you've had on others. Beverly, in her little kingdom of rules and regulations, saw a scruffy vagrant who didn't fit in. Officer Riley, a man who had been through the crucible of combat, saw the commander who brought him and his men home. Beverly's world was built on the flimsy authority of a clipboard and a set of bylaws. His was built on a foundation of loyalty and honor that she could never, ever comprehend. Beverly and her husband sold their house and moved out a few months later. But her replacement as HOA president is a retired Navy captain, and I hear he, and I have some significant doctrinal differences on the proper angle for displaying mailbox flags.